I think the real star of this movie, more than anything else, was the set design. It kind of harkens back to that childhood fort building kind of dream, but in an adult world of, again, facing our existential crises. Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews. And today I'm going to be talking about a movie that is pretty decidedly not horror, but that's okay. This was a request that was put out by one of my patrons who wanted me to watch and review the 2017 film Dave Made a Maze. Now, they didn't attach their name to this request, but in the details of why, they did say, I wanted to share it with you because I think it's a fun little romp and it's different from anything I've seen before. So yeah, not a horror film, but when the request comes through from the Patreon, I oblige. They call the shots, and if they wanted me to watch and review Elmo and Grouchland, I would, which, by the way, banger of a film, worth watching for Mandy Patinkin alone.
Here's your drink, boss.
Thank you.
This movie was written and directed by Bill Watterson. No, not that Bill Watterson, a different Bill Watterson. And also written by Steven Sears. And the basic plot of it is we have the character of Annie come home to her apartment that she shares with her boyfriend, Dave. And in it, her boyfriend is nowhere to be found. But instead, there's a big cardboard maze or fort or whatever you want to call it in the middle of the living room. And he is calling out to her from there.
What is happening?
Whatever you just did, please don't do that again.
I'm coming in.
No! It's not ready. I don't want you to get lost.
How long have you been in there?
She seems pretty frustrated by the whole thing. He's an artist who's supposed to be working and helping pay the bills and so forth. And in the meantime, by all accounts, it looks like he's just farting around in his cardboard fort, claiming that he got lost and he can't get out. Eventually, some friends come over and everybody is just kind of bemused by this whole situation of trying to get Dave out of this fort. Well, it's just seemingly something that's in the middle of the living room. Now, I gotta say that while this was going on, there was a thought in my head of, I kind of hope the movie stays where it's at. I kind of hope that this fort is just this cardboard 5 foot by whatever foot thing in the living room. And it didn't really remain that way. Basically, what it got into was once the characters started to go inside to come in after him, which he begged them not to do because they'll get lost too. Once they're inside, we have a very big kind of TARDIS Doctor Who situation where they are now lost in this big maze surrounded by cardboard. And I got to say, for me wanting to keep the film simple with this thing in the living room, I'm glad that I was wrong. I'm glad that I didn't get what I initially wanted, because what it delivered instead was something fantastical and visually breathtaking in its own weird cardboardy way. Now, I mentioned at the start of this review that this was not a horror movie, and I hold true to that. It's definitely not, although I really don't like getting bogged down in descriptions and specifics of shoehorning things into one genre or another. It's just my least favorite conversation of all time. But I do got to say that there are elements of this that strike that kind of horror chord, which is an interesting kind of two-word phrase there. Try to say it out loud. It strikes an interesting horror chord that is a little bit more existential, a little bit more philosophical, because this movie doesn't really tackle demons and ghouls and blood and gore and so forth. But what it does do is it very deftly handles the idea of coming face to face with our own inadequacies, our constant leaving projects on the shelf half done and never actually completing anything, which is one of the most fundamental tenets of horror is man versus self. That voice inside that says you've never finished anything, you never will finish anything. So maybe if you just keep something going long enough, maybe if you continue to build the Winchester house, that if it's never complete, then you've never actually failed in your goals. You're just continuing on with them, which is a terrible thought, but it's a very human thought. I know I felt that way more times than not. I created a secondary channel of reading Agatha Christie novels called Agatha Christie Read With Me. To date, and I started this back in May or June, I have made 2 videos because they're frankly quite large. They're big videos to make. They're a lot of work. And to be perfectly honest, I just haven't had the fortitude to get that third one knocked out. And it's something that I need to work on. It hovers over my head. It's this project that I haven't finished and I don't know if I ever will. but I'm hoping to. And this movie really kind of called out to all of those little things, all of those things that I have going on in my life and shining a light on them in a very kind of existential crisis sort of way. Now, this does have a lot of humor to it, a lot of good-natured ribbing and charm and so forth, which does work fairly well. Some of the jokes do kind of get worn real thin.
Brent, high five!
High five!
Real soon!
And I got to admit, cards on the table, that between acts 2 and 3, it really does feel a bit stalled out in its pacing of how it's handling things. But eventually things do pick back up, and the movie, just like The Maze, does continue on. I think the real star of this movie, more than anything else, was the set design. The creative aspect of building these physical sets and these characters and so forth, almost entirely out of cardboard, was just phenomenal. And it worked so well. It kind of harkens back to that childhood fort building kind of dream, but in an adult world of, again, facing our existential crises, in a way that really worked. It put a measure of innocence on the table while also dealing with some fairly adult themes, such as the nature of the things that set out to distract us and how we handle those, etc. If I had one major complaint about this film, and it's not a terrible complaint because overall it worked really well for what it was, but what it was a movie that was strictly and firmly grounded in the world of subtext. This was a lot of subtext, a lot of analogous imagery, a lot of undertone, a lot of character implication and association, and not a whole lot on the surface. It's not like this is a movie that works on two levels simultaneously, where we enjoy a wild romp of a film, but people are also saying, well, it was actually about this. I think the only thing that makes it even somewhat of a complaint is in the world of cinema, when we do have subtext that operates underneath the top layer and we pick up on both simultaneously, it adds to a very kind of nuanced film-going experience that was sadly missing from Dave Made a Maze. I'm talking about movies like Spartacus, where Laurent Olivier is talking with Tony Curtis and asking him whether he enjoys oysters or snails. Or in True Romance, where Dennis Hopper is having his iconic scene with Christopher Walken talking about the heritage and the lineage of people from Sicily. There was so much that was going on under the surface of that, while we also had the top-level story, and the character motivations were buried at the top and at the bottom, and we could see both happening simultaneously in what turned out to be such a heartbreaker. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about that really winds up being something special. That being said, having the movie operate entirely within the subtextual level still did work because this was funny, it was fun, it was creative, and I'm very glad to have watched, finally, 2017's Dave Made a Maze. So thank you to whomever patron requested it from me. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you've seen this movie, what did you think of it? I'd like to hear your thoughts. It's a small indie little film, but the imagery worked for me and the philosophical aspects of it did resonate. So I'm curious if that was the same for everybody else. Please leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Beyond that, remember, next time you want to watch any movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.